Welcome, everyone, to this installment of our Wisdom of the Church Fathers series.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're looking at Ignatius of Antioch. He's such a key figure, really, for grasping the feel of the early church.
Absolutely. Bishop of Antioch, martyred in Rome around, 110 AD. His letters give us this incredible window.
And today, we're focusing specifically on his letter to Polycarp. So you have this letter between two major leaders, two bishops.
Right. Polycarp himself being Bishop of Smyrna, another apostolic father. It's a fascinating exchange.
And Ignatius calls himself Theophorus right at the start. God-bearer, or born by God. That sets quite a tone, doesn't it?
It really does. It speaks to his deep sense of divine commission, maybe even his impending martyrdom. He feels carried by God into this final journey.
Okay, so let's dive into the letter itself. And before we get too deep, just a reminder to you listening, if you find this valuable, please do like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration.
Good point. Your support helps us continue the series.
So Ignatius kicks off with some pretty significant praise for Polycarp.
He does. He mentions Polycarp's godly mind, which is grounded, as it were, on an immovable rock. High praise indeed.
What does that opening tell you, starting with affirmation like that?
Well, it shows respect, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not a lecture from on high. It's acknowledging Polycarp's existing strength before offering any advice. It's a smart way to lead, frankly. Builds rapport.
And he mentions his joy in seeing Polycarp's blameless face. It adds a warmth, a personal touch.
Exactly. These weren't just positions. They were people with real relationships. That personal connection must have mattered.
Then he gets into the exhortation. Press forward in thy course, and to exhort all men that they may be saved. It moves from the personal to the universal mission pretty quickly.
Yes, the core task is always their salvation. Even in this personal letter, that broader purpose frames everything.
He follows with this charge to vindicate thine office in all diligence of flesh and of spirit. What's wrapped up in that?
It's holistic leadership, not just spiritual matters, but the practical, the physical well-being of the community too. And notice the emphasis right after that on union.
Ah, yes, unity, a constant theme for Ignatius. Why so central here, do you think?
Well, the early church faced constant threats of division, from internal disputes to external pressures. Unity wasn't just nice to have, it was essential for survival and witness. Leaders had to actively cultivate it.
And this flows into that really demanding call, bear all men as the Lord also beareth thee, and suffer all men in love. That's a high bar.
Immensely high. It speaks to incredible patience, doesn't it? Bearing with difficult people, loving them even through struggles. It's Christ-like leadership in action. Not easy, but necessary.
So moving into spiritual disciplines, he says, give thyself to unceasing prayers, and ask for more wisdom than thou hast.
Constant connection and humility. Leadership required divine insight, especially with tricky theological issues and, persecution always looming. You couldn't rely solely on your own smarts.
Right. That need for wisdom seems paramount. He also says, be watchful and keep thy spirit from slumbering.
Spiritual alertness. Don't get complacent. Be aware of dangers, both obvious and subtle.
And then speak to each man severally after the manner of God. So it's vigilance combined with personalized care.
Precisely. Tailoring your approach, understanding individual needs, and speaking truth in love with discernment, not a one-size-fits-all ministry.
I love the metaphor he uses next, the perfect athlete bearing the maladies of all.
Yeah, it's powerful. Leadership involves carrying the burdens of the community like an athlete endures rigorous training.
Where there is more toil, there is much gain. It reframes the difficulty, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests that the struggles, the hard work of leadership actually produce something valuable spiritual growth for everyone involved.
Okay, let's shift to his advice on handling different teachers. He distinguishes good scholars from the more pestilent.
Discernment again. It's nuanced. You don't treat everyone the same. Some need gentle guidance, others may be a firmer hand if they're actively causing harm.
All wounds are not healed by the same salve, he says. Very practical.
Very. It requires wisdom to know which approach is needed when.
And then that famous line, be prudent as the serpent in all things and guileless always as the dove. How do those fit together?
It's that blend of shrewdness and integrity. Be wise, be aware, understand the complexities, that's the serpent, but maintain purity of heart and motive, that's the dove. You need both.
He brings up the flesh and spirit idea again, linking it to prayer.
Right, attending to both the visible realities and the invisible spiritual dimension. Prayer informs how you handle the tangible world.
And a clear warning. Let those that are plausible and yet teach strange doctrine dismay thee. Plausible but wrong.
Yes, a caution against being swayed just by eloquence or novelty. The early church was definitely navigating some challenging new ideas. Stick to the core truth.
Then back to the athletic imagery. Stand firm, like an anvil when it is smitten. Resilience.
Exactly. An anvil takes blows but remains unshaken. Leaders face opposition, criticism. They need that inner solidity, that rootedness in faith to endure.
And the motivation, why endure?
For God's sake, that he also may endure us. It all comes back to God. Serving him, pleasing him, hoping for his acceptance. That's the ultimate driver.
Okay, shifting slightly to more practical church life matters. Be more diligent than thou art. Keep striving.
Never settle. Always look to improve, to serve more effectively.
And mark the seasons. What do you think he means by that?
Could be liturgical recognizing church seasons. Could also mean being aware of the times, discerning God's work, anticipating the future, perhaps Christ's return, and intentionality about time.
He specifically mentions widows. Let not widows be neglected. After the Lord be thou their protector.
Hugely important. Shows the church's early commitment to social care, protecting the vulnerable. The bishop had a direct responsibility here.
And this point on governance. Let nothing be done without thy consent. Neither do thou anything without the consent of God.
That's key for understanding early church structure. Episcopal authority, yes, but exercised under God's authority. A balance.
He encourages meetings more often and to seek out all men by name. Very hands-on.
It paints a picture of a deeply connected community, doesn't it? Frequent fellowship, personal outreach, not just Sunday service.
Even his advice on slaves is interesting. Acknowledging their reality but focusing on spiritual freedom.
He's navigating a difficult social structure. Serve faithfully, he says, find true freedom in Christ, but don't seek earthly freedom in a way that brings reproach or enslaves you to lust, perhaps meaning causing disruption or debt. It's complex.
Then family life, husbands, loving wives like Christ loved the church. Sisters loving the Lord and being content. Foundational stuff.
Very much so. Setting a high standard for Christian marriage, rooted in mutual love and respect, reflecting that divine relationship.
And chastity, if practiced, should be done humbly. If you boast, especially beyond the bishop, it's polluted.
Yeah, the motive matters. Virtue loses its value if it becomes a source of pride or self-display. Humility is crucial.
And this is significant. Marriage requires the bishop's consent, that the marriage may be after the Lord and not after concupiscence.
It shows marriage as a community affair, a sacred act needing the church's blessing, guided by the bishop, to ensure it's undertaken with right motives, focused on God.
And the wrap-up principle for all this.
Let all things be done to the honor of God. That's the ultimate criterion.
Then a very strong statement about leadership. Give ye heed to the bishop, that God also may give heed to you.
It underscores that hierarchical structure again. Respecting the appointed leadership is seen as respecting God's order for the church.
Ignatius expresses his own devotion to those under the bishop, presbyters, deacons, and calls everyone to shared effort.
Yes, those verbs are so active. Toil together, struggle together, run together, suffer together. It's a picture of intense solidarity.
Like soldiers serving one captain. Christ, don't be a deserter.
That military metaphor really drives home the commitment required. Loyalty, endurance, shared mission.
He even talks about baptism, faith, love, patience as spiritual armor, and works as deposits for a future reward.
It connects belief, practice, and eternal hope. Your actions now have future significance.
Then there's news from Antioch. The church there has peace, thanks partly to Polycarp's prayers.
It shows that interconnectedness. Churches prayed for each other, supported each other.
And Ignatius asks Polycarp to convene a council to send a messenger to Syria to celebrate this peace, a concrete action of shared joy.
Right. It's not just abstract unity, it's practical collaboration. God's work and yours also, he calls it. Framing the mission.
He notes he can't write to all the churches himself because he's leaving suddenly, presumably for Rome and martyrdom.
Adds that sense of urgency and impending fate.
So he asks Polycarp to write to the other churches ahead, encouraging them to send messengers too, spreading the effort.
Passing the baton, in a way, ensuring the work continues.
He ends with personal greetings and a final farewell focused on unity in Christ.
A fitting end, reinforcing his core message.
Wow. There is just so much packed into this one letter. For anyone studying theology, especially leadership and church life, it's incredibly rich, isn't it?
Absolutely. You see the theology, the pastoral care, the practical administration all woven together. It feels very real, very immediate.
That blend of high theological principle with, very down-to-earth advice on dealing with people, handling finances implicitly, organizing meetings.
Exactly. And the personal warmth between these two leaders shines through. Despite the heavy responsibilities they carried, it's a model of faithful leadership.
We really encourage you, our listeners, to maybe read this letter for yourselves alongside other writings from the Apostolic Fathers. See how these ancient insights speak today.
And maybe reflect on this question Ignatius implicitly raises for Polycarp and for us. How can we cultivate that godly mind grounded on an immovable rock in our own lives, our own service, whatever form that takes?
A great question to ponder. Well, thank you for joining us for this exploration in the Wisdom of the Church Fathers series. We hope it's been helpful for your thinking and your studies.
Hope so too.
And one last time, if you found this valuable, please do click that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. We'd also love to hear your thoughts or questions in the comments section below.
Definitely. Engaging with you all is part of the process.
Until next time, keep reflecting on the wisdom of the Church.